Italy is an other problem economy and they must draft labor reforms aimed at addressing productivity and competitiveness. Do you believe it's going to be easy to get the unions on board?
I think in order to be a successful European politician these days, you have to be called Mario, and the Prime Minister of Italy is no exception. What he is trying to do, and he knows exactly what needs to be done, is extremely important. And from my point of view, we have to watch very closely as whether or not he can deliver. And the question you ask about, will they get their measures through the unions? Are they actually going to be able to get popular support for some of the austerity measures and changes in labour laws and deregulating the business environment in Italy is the real question that you have to ask yourself. In my heart, these are very difficult things to do. If you look at what Thatcher did in the UK, what Reagan did in the US in the 80s, these were generational changes. They were hugely contentious. They required a vast amount of planning. They were very difficult to enact, and often the benefits are only felt 3, 5, sometimes only 10 years after these reforms have been enacted. So it's going to be a tough challenge. I think that you have to give people points for trying, and certainly the markets are a lot more positive this year because you can clearly see a direction of travel has been agreed on. Whether or not they can get there remains to be seen. And I think even the very strong economies in Europe, like Germany and some of the northern countries in Scandinavia, appear very safe and sound, but ultimately they still have, in many instances, quite restricted labour markets, quite substantial welfare and regulatory burdens. And so we still need to be careful, really, about the whole of the Eurozone area.
Right. Now, Dominic, there are many who believe that by the end of 2012, the Eurozone will have climbed out of recession. But do you believe rising oil prices could upset that assumption?
I think that there's a broad assumption that Europe is starting to at least show signs that it can recover, whereas I think if we look back 6 or 8 months, there was a feeling that Europe was going to implode. So the situation, as far as sentiment is concerned, is much more positive. But the reality is still that you have economies that are fundamentally uncompetitive, with huge debts and very oppressive welfare burdens and aging populations and all the other ingredients that make the Western economies much harder to understand than if you transfer your attention to the emerging markets. You know, on top of that, you've got one big point, which is inflation. And inflation is coming from 2 ways in my mind. Firstly, it's coming through quantitative easing. Whatever you call the European Central Bank's actions, I think that will lead to inflation of some description. And secondly, you've got pressure on raw materials, and oil is obviously the most clear example of those pressures coming from emerging markets.